This is the house in which my husband was born and brought up. It has undergone some changes since the days when he first saw the light of day, but they were changes made to meet the needs of the growing family and his own tastes. He always felt that this was his home, and he loved the house and the view, the woods, special trees, the particular spots where he played as a child, or where he had ridden his horse as a boy and a man, or where he later drove his car when he was no longer able to ride. Life here had always a healing quality for him. Here he spent the summer, 9 months after he had infantile paralysis, and laboriously worked to regain some measure of strength which would enable him to get about. As he gained physically, the healing of the spirit went forward at the same time. His years in the White House taught him that the homes of presidents, particularly their birthplaces, usually become of such great public interest that the families find them hard to live in. During my husband's term of office, he was asked to take over various birthplaces of former presidents. Loving history as he did, I think my husband always rather enjoyed trying to project what the future might bring, and so he could see his own home as one day being owned by the people of the United States and being one of the points where they would come to increase their understanding of history through a greater knowledge of the men who had made it. Since this is the first anniversary of my husband's death, I am happy to have it connected with something which will always be as alive as the dedication of this house to the people of the United States. My husband's spirit will live in this house, in the library and in the quiet garden, inside the hedge where he wished his body to lie. It is his life and his character and his personality which will live with us and which will endure and be imparted to those who come to see the surroundings in which he grew to maturity. It is with pleasure that our children and I see this house dedicated to the people and open to them. It was the people, all of the people of this country and of the world, whom my husband loved and kept constantly in his mind and heart. He would want them to enjoy themselves in these surroundings and to draw from them rest and peace and strength as he did all the days of his life. Mr. President, I am happy that you could be with us on this occasion, and to you, Mr. Secretary, I now turn over the full possession of the land, the house with its contents, the other buildings, which my husband willed to the people of the United States.
Welcome. My name is Francesca Urban, and I'm standing at the home of the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 2021 marks the 75th anniversary of the dedication and opening of the home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt National Historic Site. You have just seen images from April 12, 1946, when Eleanor Roosevelt fulfilled her husband's dream of giving her beloved home as a gift to you, the American people. The dignitaries who attended included President Harry Truman, officials from the Department of the Interior, members of the Supreme Court, Marian Anderson, and members of the United Nations, and about 2,000 other people as well. As everyone was waiting for the ceremony to begin, excited shrieks were heard from teenagers attending because an unexpected guest arrived. It was a music idol, their favorite singer, Frank Sinatra, who was really very popular back in that time period. The last photo that you saw were security guards trying to hold back the excited teenagers trying to get close to their idol. But it was a very moving and very special event, and the FDR home became very, very popular. Just in a few months, they had over 200,000 visitors coming to see this house. Occasionally, Eleanor Roosevelt, who lived at Valkill, 2 miles from here, would bring guests on a tour. And if you were lucky to be here on that particular day, you could probably tag along and hear some of the interesting stories she had to tell about life here in this house. So eventually the National Park Service asked if she would be willing to record her memories of the house. In this video, you will hear Eleanor Roosevelt talk about the rooms and her special memories of life here. There are some areas she didn't cover, which I will fill in with some information. I don't think she would mind. So please join me in following in the footsteps of Eleanor Roosevelt as she shares FDR's gift with you. As we enter the house, in front of us stands the old Dutch clock that FDR's parents, James and Sarah Roosevelt, purchased. On the left side of the clock is the entrance to the Dresden room, and on the right, the entrance to the dining room. Mrs. Roosevelt will talk about these rooms later. And now I defer to Mrs. Roosevelt to continue the tour and tell you all about President Roosevelt's study.
Needed to come into his little study. This was an addition which was put on when the big library was added at the other end. Originally, we used it as the children's schoolroom in summer. But when they outgrew the need of a schoolroom, we then turned it into my husband's study. He had his favorite books always in these shelves, the things he was working on, his pamphlets and various classifications that he wanted to make would always be here, even after the library was built and he had begun to put some of the things in there. As you see, there are some of his prints on the wall, but these are just a small part of his naval collection. And he always had the world globe there to look at. I think that most people remember this because here is where he saw all his important visitors. They sat across the desk from him, and I often wonder how things the desk and the chairs in this room could tell about. When he didn't have too big a party, he would very often have cocktails before dinner in here. His mother did not approve of cocktails, so we would always invite her to come, and occasionally she would come and sit and watch with disapproval. But ordinarily she would refuse to come in, and we would join her in the dining room. My husband, in his will, asked that we leave everything as nearly as though we were living in the house as possible. And so the china and the silver are all the same that we used when we were here. My mother-in-law had the table and the chairs made in Boston, and so they are also the same. When we lived here and had a family here, there was always a little square table in that alcove where we sat the children for their meals. I left the old Japanese bowl for flowers because my mother-in-law told me that that was the first bowl that when she came here on a visit with my aunt, Mrs. Coles, who was a friend of James Roosevelt, who was to be my mother-in-law's husband, he asked my mother-in-law, who was then Sarah Delano, if
she would arrange the flowers in that bowl. It's not a very easy bowl to arrange flowers in, but she did it, and because it was the first one he'd ever asked her to arrange flowers in, she always arranged the flowers in it herself from that time on, even to the year that she died. She was still doing it whenever she was able to. Now, this room was one of my mother-in-law's favorites. We never liked it because the chairs were uncomfortable, but we had to sit here very often, and she called it the music room. And you notice the Dresden china that her husband had bought, and is very beautiful, though some of it is now broken. And the Chinese things in this house were all things that belonged to my mother-in-law's family, because her father, Warren Delano, had gone to China as a very young man and made a fortune, been a member of Russell and Company, which was a British firm, and then come home and lost it in a panic and gone back and made another fortune. And so you will see Chinese things everywhere, and they all come from that side of the Delano side of the family. Now, on the piano, you will see all the photographs, many of them of royalty in exile during World War II. The King and Queen of Great Britain came here before the war, and they were not in exile at any time, but many of the others were. And these are the photographs that were given my mother-in-law.
The walls in the hallway were filled with FDR's naval print collection, as well as historic photos of naval officers. He loved to collect anything naval-related. FDR's initial ambition in life was to become a naval officer, but his father discouraged him. This was because as his father became older and more frail, he wanted his son to be nearby, something which a naval career would not allow. This statue of FDR was done soon after he had been elected to his first political office in 1910 to the New York State Legislature. His proud godmother, Nellie Blodgett, had commissioned it. The sculptor was Prince Paul Trubetskoy. The statue was cut off at the legs. When asked why he did this, the sculptor replied, "I could not picture FDR with legs." This was 10 years before FDR contracted polio and was unable to walk unaided. FDR's father, James Roosevelt, was educated as an attorney and became director of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad. Originally, the Roosevelt family fortune came from a sugar refinery business established by Mr. James Roosevelt's great-grandfather, Isaac, whose portrait you will see shortly in the living room. 4 years after his first wife, Rebecca, passed away, James married Sarah Delano. He was 52 years old. She was 26. 2 years later, their only child, Franklin, was born here on January 30th, 1882. Mr. James died when Franklin was only 18 years old. The house and money and property were inherited by Sarah. She lived here and managed the property until she died at the age of 86 in 1941. This is the room that FDR's mother, Sarah, used as her office. It was named the Snuggery because it was a small, snug room. In this Victorian-style room is a very modern piece for the time, a television set that was given to FDR in 1939 after he had been televised at the New York State World's Fair. FDR was not impressed with it, calling it the newfangled invention that had no future. He was the master of radio. Through his fireside chats, he easily connected to the American people and to the world. And now Mrs. Roosevelt continues the tour in the library living room on the south end of the house.
Now here we come to the addition, which my husband and his mother added just little, well, really during World War I. And that portrait over there is portrait done by Bay Emmett Rand. My husband and I didn't like it, and my mother-in-law did, and so she gave it to my mother-in-law, and it has been here ever since. That portrait is a Gilbert Stuart, and is of the first Isaac Roosevelt, who sat in the Constitutional Convention that ratified the Constitution for the state of New York here in Poughkeepsie. And it's a very good Gilbert Stuart. The one at the other end of the room, over the other fireplace, is James Roosevelt, his son, my husband's great-grandfather. And I think that the Isaac, who was his grandfather, is the one, I used to think it was this one, but I'm not sure. One or the other became a doctor and yet never practiced because he could not bear human suffering, which I always liked the story and the idea. Now, the two chairs are the chairs given to the governor of the state of New York, which he has used as his desk chair in his office while he's been there. Since my husband served 2 terms, when he was governor, it was only 2 years for each term. And so he had 2 chairs. He always sat on the left side. My mother-in-law sat on the one on the right side. And when he did not have cocktails before dinner in the other room, he would have a card table put in front of him and would have them here. And the night that the King and Queen of England were here, they drove up from after a very full day at the fair, and they were quite late for dinner, and there were people here for dinner. My husband said, oh, they would be tired, they will want a cocktail. And my mother-in-law firmly said, I am quite sure the King would prefer a nice hot cup of tea. And so when they came in, my husband said to the King, I have cocktails, but my mother thinks that you would rather have a hot cup of tea. And the King looked at him and said, my mother would say the same thing, but I will have a cocktail.
The Buddhist temple gong was from China, where the Delanos made their fortune in the China tea trade. FDR's mother used it as a dinner gong to summon the grandchildren to meals. You had to be washed and dressed and ready on time. FDR was 39 years old when he contracted polio, which affected his legs. After polio, he could only stand or walk by having braces on his legs and a person to lean on to maintain his balance. He could no longer use stairs. There was a manual lift installed in the house for the purpose of moving steamer trunks. After polio, FDR used it to access all 4 levels of the house. He refused to have it motorized for fear he would get stuck in it if there were ever a fire in the house. To make the house completely accessible, ramps were installed on the few steps going down into the living room and from the lift landing on the upstairs landing to the 2nd floor. FDR designed the wheelchair. It was a kitchen chair with legs cut off and wheels put on it. He disliked the wheelchairs of that period, which had high backs and arms. He thought it made him look like an invalid. When he sat in this wheelchair and put a blanket over his legs, you could barely tell it was a wheelchair. He basically only used it to move to a room where he would transfer to a regular chair. Mrs. Roosevelt will now continue with a tour of the 2nd floor of the house.
And the King had this room here. And in the morning when he came to breakfast, he said, I felt very much at home last night because you have the same prints that my grandmother has in the room I have when I visit her. And of course, these are just old English prints, and so it was quite natural. But the night he was here after dinner, the President kept him downstairs with Mackenzie King, and they discussed the coming war, which everybody knew pretty well was on the way. And when he came upstairs, he knocked on Mackenzie King's door. He said, come in, Mackenzie, I must talk to you. And when he came in, he told my husband afterwards that the king said, "Why cannot my ministers talk to me as the president did? I learned more tonight than I've ever known before." And that was very interesting because it showed that people who are in a position of being dependent on you, of course, are never quite as frank, never quite as able to tell you exactly what they think.
The beds in the chintz room came from the furniture factory that Eleanor Roosevelt owned and operated at Valkill, known as Valkill Industries. Queen Elizabeth of England stayed in this room next door to King George, who was in the pink room when they were here in June of 1939. At another time, Princess Juliana of the Netherlands stayed here. Originally, the chintz room was where FDR and his new wife Eleanor stayed when they came to Hyde Park. When the new wing was added to the house in 1915, they relocated their bedroom to that section of the house. According to Eleanor Roosevelt, it was to be a suite of rooms for her and FDR's use.
This, of course, was my husband's room when he was a boy, and he kept it until he married. And his mother had a special brass bed made specially long for him because she did not want his growth to be stunted by sleeping in too short a bed. And this was Franklin's father's and mother's bedroom, and the furniture in it is the same as it was at that time, so Franklin was born in that bed. And when my mother-in-law was alive, she had this furniture in the room that she used after they built the wing. But she left a note for my husband saying that she wanted it put back in this room where he was born. So immediately after her death, he had it put back in this room. Now we are in the wing, which was over the big library as the addition. And this was my husband's room, and he loved his bed, which was a gift from his godmother, Miss Blodgett, because he could sit up there, have his breakfast, and he could look out on the Hudson River and on his trees, and he even knew certain big trees that grew above the others and would watch them year by year as they came, as they bloomed. And so this was a room he liked. Now the chair there is the chair that Fowler always slept in, and it's his dressing gown, and right by his bed you will see a special telephone, which was the special wire to washing. Otherwise, the room has photographs, family photographs, and over the mantelpiece, of course, a picture of the little schooner Half Moon, which he sailed up along the Maine coast always. This middle room here was my room, and this end was his mother's room, which she used and in which she died. And I showed you the furniture in the other room, used to be in here, and has now gone back as it originally was at her request. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything more here to interest anyone.
Thank you for joining this unique tour of the home of Franklin D. Roosevelt. We hope you enjoyed listening to former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt sharing her special memories of the place.